What if everything you thought you knew about the Middle Ages was wrong? Picture this, waking up in a world without eyeglasses, where farmers still struggled with crude wooden plows, where time was measured only by the sun's shadow, and where the very idea of a university didn't exist. This wasn't some distant prehistoric era. This was life before the medieval period unleashed its wave of astonishing innovations. Far from the Dark Ages myth that paints this time as stagnant or backward, the medieval world was a hotbed of creativity, problem-solving, and scientific curiosity that shaped the foundations of our modern lives in ways we rarely stop to appreciate. Think about the last time you checked the time on a mechanical clock, or slipped on a pair of glasses to read, or even walked past a university campus. Each of these everyday conveniences traces its roots back to the Middle Ages, a period bursting with ingenious minds who refused to accept the limits of their time. While history books often focus on knights and castles, the real story is far more fascinating. Medieval inventors, scholars, and craftsmen quietly revolutionized agriculture, medicine, engineering, and education, leaving behind a legacy so pervasive that we've forgotten it even came from them. So how did a thousand-year stretch of history, often overshadowed by the Renaissance and Industrial Revolution, produce so many world-changing breakthroughs? The answer lies in the relentless human drive to innovate, even in the face of limited resources. From the humble heavy plow that fed growing populations to the first rudimentary surgical tools that paved the way for modern medicine, medieval advancements weren't just lucky accidents. They were deliberate, brilliant solutions to the challenges of their time. And today, we're going to uncover 28 of these astonishing inventions, each one a testament to how the so-called Dark Ages were anything but dark. By the end of this journey, you'll never look at your wristwatch, your eyeglasses, or even your morning coffee the same way again. Imagine a world where fading eyesight meant the end of your career, where scholars had to abandon their books, craftsmen could no longer shape delicate details, and scribes watched a lifetime of knowledge slip into blurry obscurity. That was reality until the 13th century, when an ingenious Italian monk had a radical idea, grinding pieces of quartz or glass into curved lenses and mounting them in frames. The first wearable eyeglasses were born, and suddenly, the written word wasn't just for the young and sharp-eyed anymore. This wasn't just a convenience, it was a revolution. For the first time, aging monks could spend decades painstakingly copying ancient texts, preserving everything from Greek philosophy to medical treatises that might have otherwise been lost. Artisans, whose hands still held decades of skill, could now see their work clearly, leading to intricate carvings, detailed metalwork, and stained glass that still dazzles us today. Even more astonishing, these early opticians didn't stop at simple magnification. By experimenting with lens thickness and curvature, they laid the groundwork for far greater discoveries, like the telescopes that would later let Galileo peer into the cosmos, or the microscopes that revealed the invisible world of cells. What's truly remarkable is how quickly this innovation spread. Within decades, workshops across Europe were refining designs, crafting spectacles for nearsighted scholars and far-sighted jewelers alike. Venice, already a hub of glassmaking, became the Silicon Valley of its day, churning out lenses that made the written word accessible to thousands. Far from a niche luxury, Eyeglasses became a symbol of intellectual life, appearing in portraits of bishops, merchants, and even saints. The Middle Ages didn't just give us a tool, they gave us a new way of seeing, literally and figuratively, proving that even the simplest invention could illuminate the future. Now, imagine trying to organize your day without minutes or hours, just the vague movement of shadows across a sundial or the slow drip of a water clock. That was the reality until medieval monks faced a pressing problem: how to call their communities to prayer at precise intervals throughout the day and night. Their solution: a revolutionary invention that would change humanity's relationship with time forever: the mechanical clock. Deep in the monasteries of Europe, where rigid schedules governed every moment of spiritual life, clever engineers began tinkering with gears, weights, and escapements. These weren't just crude timekeepers. They were marvels of precision, using falling weights to power intricate gear systems that measured time more accurately than ever before. The first mechanical clocks, often mounted in church towers, didn't just ring bells for prayers. They introduced the radical idea that time could be divided into equal, measurable units, independent of the sun's whims. This breakthrough rippled far beyond monastery walls. For the first time, towns could synchronize activities, markets could open and close at set hours, and workers could measure their labor in consistent increments. By the 14th century, monumental public clocks like the one in Strasbourg Cathedral became symbols of civic pride, their faces adorned with moving astronomical figures that dazzled onlookers. But the real impact was even deeper. These early timekeeping machines laid the foundation for the scientific revolution. Without precise clocks, sailors couldn't navigate the open seas, astronomers couldn't track celestial movements, and later, factories couldn't regiment the industrial age. What's truly remarkable is how medieval clockmakers achieved such precision with nothing but hand-forged iron and patient observation. They pioneered the escapement mechanism, a delicate dance of gears and levers that regulated a clock's movement, a principle still used in mechanical watches today. These weren't just practical devices. They reflected a growing medieval fascination with understanding the universe's hidden mechanics. The clock became a metaphor for divine order, a ticking heartbeat at the center of towns, reminding everyone that time itself could be mastered. So the next time you glance at your wristwatch or smartphone, remember, those ticking seconds trace back to a monk's workshop centuries ago, where the relentless pursuit of precision gave birth to the modern world's rhythm. The Middle Ages didn't just tell time, they invented it. Beneath the quiet fields of medieval Europe, a revolution was taking root, one that would change the course of civilization. Picture a farmer struggling with a simple wooden plow, barely scratching the surface of the dense, clay-heavy soil that dominated northern Europe. Crops were meager, hunger was constant, and entire communities lived at the mercy of the land. Then came an innovation so powerful it reshaped continents: the heavy plow, a beast of iron and ingenuity that turned stubborn earth into fertile promise. This wasn't just an upgrade, it was a transformation. Unlike its lightweight predecessors, the heavy plow featured an iron-tipped blade that could slice through thick roots and compacted soil with ease. But the real genius lay in its curved moldboard, a clever addition that lifted and flipped the earth like a page in a book, exposing nutrient-rich layers beneath. Suddenly, farmers could work land once considered unfarmable, unlocking vast stretches of northern Europe for cultivation. The impact was staggering. Fields that once yielded barely enough to survive now produced surpluses, allowing populations to grow and towns to flourish. What's often overlooked is how this single tool sparked a chain reaction of progress. With more food came stability, villages expanded, trade networks thickened, and for the first time, not everyone had to farm to survive. Craftsmen, merchants, and scholars could thrive because the heavy plow had freed them from the daily struggle for bread. Even crop rotation, a practice we now take for granted, became possible as the plow's efficiency allowed farmers to alternate fields between grains and legumes, replenishing the soil naturally. The heavy plow did more than feed mouths, it built civilizations. As surplus grain flowed into markets, towns grew into cities, and the medieval economy began to hum with activity. Ports buzzed with ships carrying grain to distant lands, while guilds and universities sprang up in newly prosperous urban centers. This unassuming tool, born from the need to conquer stubborn soil, became the unsung hero of Europe's rise. So the next time you bite into a loaf of bread or stroll through a bustling city street, remember, it all started with a simple blade cutting deep into the earth, turning scarcity into abundance. For centuries, oxen lumbered through fields and along muddy roads, their slow, steady strength the backbone of medieval agriculture and transport. Then came a breakthrough so deceptively simple it changed the course of history: the padded horse collar. Unlike the crude throat and girth harnesses that had been used since ancient times, this curved, well-padded design rested snugly around a horse's shoulders, distributing weight evenly instead of pressing dangerously against its windpipe. The difference was staggering. Suddenly, a single horse could pull 3 times the load of an ox without strain, turning what was once a day's plowing into a morning's work. This wasn't just about efficiency, it reshaped societies. Horses, once limited to warfare or light carts, became the engines of medieval Europe. Farmers could plow faster and farther, expanding their fields and harvests. Merchants, wagons now raced along trade routes at nearly double the speed of ox-drawn carts, carrying goods, and with them, new ideas between towns in record time. Even the rhythm of daily life accelerated, as horse-drawn carriages made travel accessible beyond the wealthy elite. The horse collar didn't just move loads, it moved history forward. What's astonishing is how this innovation reveals medieval problem-solving at its finest. Early designs, like the ancient breastplate harness, had choked horses if they pulled too hard, limiting their potential. But medieval craftsmen observed, experimented, and iterated, sculpting leather and wood into a shape that maximized power without harm. By shifting pressure to the horse's robust shoulders and spine, they unlocked an untapped reservoir of speed and endurance. Soon, networks of horse relay stations emerged, foreshadowing modern postal systems, while couriers galloped with news that once took weeks to arrive. The ripple effects went even deeper. As horses replaced oxen, blacksmiths honed new skills to shoe their faster, harder-working hooves. Stable designs evolved to house these prized animals, and selective breeding flourished, giving rise to the powerful draft horses we know today. Even warfare transformed. Supply wagons could now keep pace with armies, enabling longer campaigns. All because a few observant minds reimagined a strap of leather and a block of wood. So the next time you see a modern truck hauling goods or a tractor tilling a field, remember, their legacy traces back to a humble collar that taught the medieval world the true meaning of horsepower. High above the patchwork fields of medieval Europe, a new kind of giant began to rise, not a castle or cathedral, but a towering wooden structure with sails that caught the wind like a ship stranded on land. These were the first windmills, and their arrival marked a turning point in how humanity harnessed nature's power. While we often associate renewable energy with modern solar panels and wind farms, the truth is far more surprising. Medieval engineers were pioneering clean energy centuries before the Industrial Revolution, with inventions so advanced there still studied by mechanical engineers today. The genius of the medieval windmill wasn't just in its ability to grind grain, though that alone revolutionized food production. These structures were multifaceted powerhouses, capable of pumping water to drain swamps for farmland, crushing olives for oil, and even powering saws to cut timber with precision. What made them extraordinary was their adaptability. Dutch engineers, facing constant battles against flooding, used windmills to reclaim vast stretches of land from the sea, creating the polders that define the Netherlands to this day. In arid regions, wind-powered pumps drew water from deep wells, turning deserts into gardens. But the real marvel was in the mechanics. Medieval millwrights mastered aerodynamics long before the term existed, crafting sails with adjustable angles to capture wind efficiently. They invented the fantail, a smaller set of blades that automatically turned the main sails into the wind, a precursor to modern turbine yaw systems. Gears and drive shafts transferred power with precision, showcasing an understanding of mechanical advantage that wouldn't be formally described until the Renaissance. Some mills even featured horizontal, a design echoed in today's most advanced wind turbines. What's often overlooked is how these machines democratized energy. Unlike water mills tied to rivers, windmills could be built almost anywhere, freeing communities from geographic constraints. Villages that once relied on back-breaking hand grinding could now produce flour in bulk, fueling population growth and trade. The windmill became more than a tool. It was a symbol of human ingenuity, proving that even the invisible force of the wind could be tamed to serve progress. By the late Middle Ages, windmill technology had spread from the misty coasts of England to the plains of Spain, each culture adapting the design to local needs. Persian engineers added vertical sails for desert winds, while Scandinavian builders crafted mills that could rotate entirely to face shifting gusts. This wasn't just practical innovation, it was a global conversation in engineering, centuries before the internet. So the next time you see a modern wind farm's graceful blades turning, remember, their ancestor wasn't some Victorian invention, but a creaking wooden giant on a medieval hilltop, where the future of clean energy first began to spin. In the bustling markets and winding streets of medieval cities, another kind of revolution was unfolding, not in workshops or fields, but in the halls where scholars gathered to debate, discover, and pass on knowledge. The birth of the university, an institution so familiar today that we rarely pause to consider its origins, was one of the Middle Ages' most profound gifts to the modern world. Picture the scene in 12th century Bologna, where students from across Europe flocked to study Roman law under wandering scholars. There, in those informal gatherings, the first seeds of higher education, as we know it, were planted. a radical departure from the isolated monastery schools of earlier centuries. What made these medieval universities revolutionary wasn't just their curriculum. Though the rediscovery of Aristotle's works through Arabic translations sparked intellectual fireworks, but their very structure. For the first time, education followed a standardized system, with set courses, examinations, and formal degrees that carried weight across borders. Paris became a beacon for theology, Oxford and Cambridge for the liberal arts, while Salerno's medical school blended Greek, Arab, and Jewish healing traditions into a cohesive science. These weren't just places of learning, they were engines of social mobility, where a poor student like Thomas could rise to reshape Western thought. The medieval classroom might surprise modern students. Lectures from the Latin meaning involved professors slowly unpacking handwritten texts line by line, while students scribbled notes on wax tablets. But debate was the lifeblood of these institutions. Structured disputes, where scholars defended opposing viewpoints on everything from metaphysics to medicine, honed critical thinking skills that still define academia today. Even the concept of academic freedom has roots here, as universities fought for independence from local bishops and kings, creating protected spaces for unfettered inquiry. Perhaps the most enduring legacy was their role as knowledge crossroads. Muslim, Jewish, and Christian scholars exchanged ideas in Spain's University of Salamanca, while translators in Italy rendered Arabic medical texts into Latin. This collaborative spirit birthed new disciplines, canon law, optics, even early economics, and preserved ancient wisdom through meticulous copying. When the Black Death ravaged Europe, it was university-trained doctors who pioneered quarantine measures and public health records, laying groundwork for modern epidemiology. The ripple effects are everywhere. The doctoral robe you see at graduations, a direct descendant of medieval academic dress, the peer review process, rooted in those rigorous scholarly debates. Even the division between undergraduate and graduate study mirrors the medieval separation of bachelor and master's degrees. These institutions didn't just transmit knowledge, they created a culture of systematic questioning that would eventually give rise to the scientific method. So the next time you step into a lecture hall or browse a digital library, remember, you're walking in the footsteps of those first medieval scholars who believed knowledge should be organized, challenged, and above all, shared. Look up, way up, at the dizzying heights of a Gothic cathedral, where stone seems to defy gravity and sunlight pours through jewel-toned glass like liquid fire. This wasn't just architecture. It was medieval engineering pushed to its absolute limits, a symphony of physics and faith that reshaped skylines across Europe. The secret lay in three revolutionary innovations: pointed arches that channeled weight downward, ribbed vaults that distributed forces like a spider's web, and flying buttresses that acted as external scaffolding. Together, they turned stone into something almost weightless, allowing walls to soar hundreds of feet while remaining impossibly thin. But Gothic architecture wasn't just about height, it was about light. For the first time, churches could be filled with towering stained glass windows, transforming sunlight into divine storytelling. Imagine walking into Chartres Cathedral, where over 150 biblical scenes shimmered in glowing blues and reds, turning the entire space into a radiant manuscript. This was theology written in glass and geometry, designed to awe and educate illiterate congregations. The rose window at Dame, with its intricate stone tracery and kaleidoscope of color, wasn't just decoration. It was a cosmic diagram, embodying the medieval belief in a harmonious, mathematically ordered universe. What's often forgotten is the sheer precision behind these marvels. Master builders, working without modern calculators or steel reinforcement, relied on compasses, ropes, and painstaking geometric ratios. The golden section, a mathematical proportion found in nature, dictated everything from window shapes to floor plans. These cathedrals were essentially massive stone equations, their stability proven not through textbooks, but through trial, error, and occasional collapses. When cathedrals' choir vaults famously crashed down in 1284, builders didn't abandon their ambitions. They studied the failure, reinforced the design, and tried again. The legacy of Gothic engineering echoes far beyond churches. Modern skyscrapers owe their skeletal frames to those medieval ribbed vaults, while the principles of load distribution, pioneered by flying buttresses, underpin everything from suspension bridges to airplane wings. Even today's stained glass conservators still use techniques perfected in 13th century workshops, where artisans discovered how cobalt oxide could produce that iconic deep blue, or how flashed glass, layering colors, created unparalleled depth. The Middle Ages didn't just build beautiful spaces, they unlocked the very language of structural possibility, proving that vision, when paired with calculation, could touch the heavens. So the next time you marvel at a glass-walled high-rise or a suspension bridge's graceful curve, remember, their DNA traces back to those medieval masons who dared to make stone fly. At a bustling medieval marketplace in Pisa, a young merchant named Leonardo watched traders from North Africa tally their accounts with bewildering speed, using symbols unlike anything he'd seen in Europe. These were Arabic numerals, including the revolutionary concept of zero, a system so efficient it would soon render Roman numerals obsolete. This encounter wasn't just a cultural exchange. It sparked a mathematical revolution that would redefine commerce, science, and ultimately the digital age. The superiority of Arabic numerals lay in their elegant simplicity. Unlike Roman numerals, where calculating MCMXLVII minus DCCLIX required abacus or tally sticks, the new system's positional notation, where a digit's value depends on its place, made arithmetic intuitive. Suddenly, merchants could compute profits in moments, astronomers could chart planetary movements with precision, and architects could calculate structural loads without cumbersome conversions. But the true star of this system was zero, a placeholder that medieval Indian mathematicians had perfected and Arab scholars had carried westward. This seemingly simple circle transformed mathematics by enabling concepts like negative numbers and decimal fractions, cornerstones of modern finance and engineering. Adoption wasn't instantaneous. Traditionalists clung to Roman numerals for centuries, some even denouncing zero as dangerous or heretical. How could nothing be something? Yet practicality prevailed. Italian banks led the charge, recognizing how Arabic numerals reduced accounting errors and fraud. Universities followed, as scholars found advanced algebra impossible without them. By the 15th century, the system had reached every corner of Europe, thanks partly to press standardizing the symbols we still use today. The long-term impact is almost incalculable. Without positional notation, computers as we know them couldn't exist. Binary code is fundamentally built on the same principle. Scientific revolutions from Newton's calculus to relativity relied on this medieval mathematical framework. Even everyday conveniences like barcodes and digital clocks trace their lineage back to those merchant caravans carrying numerals across deserts. The Middle Ages didn't just adopt a numbering system. They gave us the language of modern mathematics, proving that sometimes the most profound revolutions begin with a single digit. On storm-tossed medieval ships, where sailors once clung to shorelines like lifelines, a small wooden box with a spinning needle changed everything. The magnetic compass, though originating in ancient China, became Europe's secret weapon for conquering the open ocean. Unlike earlier versions used for land divination, medieval navigators refined it into a precision instrument, mounting the magnetized needle on a pivot and enclosing it in a protective case marked with cardinal directions. Suddenly, fog-covered skies or moonless nights no longer meant disaster. As long as that needle pointed north, captains could plot courses through uncharted waters with unprecedented confidence. This wasn't just about convenience, it reshaped the world map. Before the compass, Mediterranean sailors relied on portolan charts, detailed coast-hugging maps filled with handwritten notes about landmarks. Venturing beyond sight of land was a gamble reserved for the desperate or foolhardy. But with the compass, routes became faster and far more daring. Genoese and Portuguese explorers began stitching together fragments of celestial navigation, dead reckoning, and magnetic readings to cross the Atlantic and round Africa's treacherous Cape of Good Hope. The compass turned the ocean from a barrier into a highway, linking continents in ways even the Romans hadn't imagined. What's fascinating is how medieval sailors decoded the compass's quirks. They noticed discrepancies between magnetic north and true north, a phenomenon called variation, and painstakingly mapped these deviations along different coastlines. Venetian navigators kept handwritten logs, adjusting their readings based on experience, while Norse sailors likely used lodestones alongside sunstones to navigate the North Atlantic's glare. This empirical approach laid groundwork for modern geomagnetic science, proving that medieval minds weren't just using tools, they were dissecting nature's hidden forces. The ripple effects were staggering. Reliable navigation fueled the spice trade, making Venetian and Arab merchants wealthy middlemen until Portugal's shattered their monopoly by sailing directly to India. Insurance markets blossomed in maritime cities like Barcelona, where ship owners could now calculate risks with newfound precision. Even the concept of longitude, once a navigational nightmare, became solvable once compasses proved Earth's magnetic field could be. Columbus's voyages, Magellan's circumnavigation, the Columbian exchange, all hinged on that humble spinning needle. So the next time your phone's GPS pinpoints your location instantly, remember, it all started with medieval sailors squinting at a trembling needle in a wooden box, daring to trust magnetism over the visible horizon. Their leap of faith didn't just guide ships, it steered humanity into the modern age, deep in the vaulted workshops of medieval alchemists, where scholars once sought to turn lead into gold. A far more explosive discovery was taking shape: gunpowder. While Chinese inventors first mixed saltpeter, sulfur, and charcoal centuries earlier, it was medieval Europeans who transformed this volatile compound from a curiosity into a world-altering force. The moment they realized its potential, warfare would never be the same, but the impact went far beyond the battlefield. The earliest cannons, crude iron tubes bound with hoops like barrels, were terrifyingly unpredictable. Some burst upon firing, scattering shrapnel among their own crews. Yet by the 14th century, metallurgists had refined casting techniques, creating bronze and iron guns that could hurl stone or metal balls with enough force to shatter castle walls. The Siege of Constantinople in 1453 marked a turning point. Ottoman forces used massive bombard cannons to breach the legendary walls, proving no fortification was impregnable. Suddenly, architects had to rethink centuries of defensive design, replacing towering curtain walls with low, angled bastions that could deflect cannonballs, a shift still visible in star-shaped forts across Europe. But the true genius lay in the experimentation. Medieval gunners became early physicists, meticulously recording how varying powder grain sizes altered combustion rates, or how barrel length affected projectile trajectory. Their notebooks reveal an intuitive grasp of concepts we now call pressure, acceleration, and kinetic energy, long before Newton formulated his laws of motion. At the University of Paris, scholars like Jean studied the motion of cannonballs, laying groundwork for the principle of inertia. Even the word ballistics comes from the medieval ballista, reflecting how deeply artillery influenced early science. Beyond warfare, gunpowder's chemical properties fascinated alchemists. They noted how its rapid expansion mimicked natural phenomena like earthquakes or volcanic eruptions, sparking theories about energy transformation that would later inspire steam engine pioneers. Mining engineers adapted gunpowder for blasting rock, accelerating tunnel and quarry work that had relied on slow, manual labor. Fireworks, first developed as military signals, evolved into elaborate displays that merged art and chemistry, a tradition still lighting up skies today. The most unexpected legacy might be psychological. The thunderous roar of early cannons didn't just destroy walls, it shattered medieval notions of invincibility, proving even the mightiest knight in armor could fall to a well-aimed shot. This democratization of power eroded feudal hierarchies, shifting influence towards centralized states that could afford artillery corps. Like the internet in our era, gunpowder was a disruptive technology that rewrote the rules overnight. So the next time you hear a fireworks display or see an old fort's slanted walls, remember, those echoes trace back to medieval workshops where smoke, fire, and curiosity forged the modern world. In a dimly lit medieval workshop, a scholar peers through a curved glass lens not to sharpen blurry text, but to watch how sunlight bends as it passes through, casting rainbow-like streaks across his parchment. This quiet moment of curiosity, far removed from the practical use of spectacles, marked the birth of experimental optics. While eyeglasses restored failing vision, these same lenses became medieval Europe's first scientific instruments, transforming casual observation into systematic study of light itself. One groundbreaking discovery emerged from studying spherical lenses, the way they could magnify tiny objects or focus sunlight to a searing point. Roger Bacon, a 13th century Franciscan friar, meticulously documented how light refracts when passing through different materials, even suggesting lenses could be combined to see distant objects or minute details. His writings hinted at possibilities far beyond his time, telescopes and microscopes that wouldn't exist for centuries. Meanwhile, in the Islamic world, scholars had already written treatises on light's behavior, which medieval translators eagerly absorbed and expanded upon. These cross-cultural exchanges turned lenses into tools for probing nature's secrets, not just aiding human sight. The real breakthrough came when thinkers began quantifying refraction. Using water-filled glass spheres and angled prisms, they measured how light bent at precise mathematical angles, noting that different colors dispersed unevenly, a phenomenon later dubbed chromatic aberration. These observations, scribbled in marginalia and personal notebooks, became the raw data for future giants who used medieval lens studies to explain planetary motion, and Isaac Newton, whose prism experiments decomposed sunlight into a spectrum. The Middle Ages didn't just hand these scientists lenses, they handed them a new way of seeing the universe, one where light could be dissected, measured, and understood. What's often overlooked is how these investigations bridged art and science. Medieval stained glass craftsmen, manipulating light through colored panels, unknowingly demonstrated principles of wavelength filtering. Lens grinders polishing quartz for spectacles discovered how subtle curve adjustments affected focal length, knowledge later applied to camera, the ancestors of modern photography. Even the humble magnifying glass, used to inspect manuscripts or ignite tinder, became a laboratory tool revealing the intricate structures of insect wings or snowflakes. The legacy of these explorations is everywhere today, from the corrective lenses in your glasses to the fiber optic cables carrying this video's data. When medieval scholars held up a piece of curved glass and asked not just, "How does this help me?" but "Why does this happen?" they ignited a chain reaction of inquiry that would illuminate everything from quantum physics to space telescopes. Their greatest invention wasn't a lens. It was the relentless curiosity that turned a simple tool into a window on the cosmos. Long before famous Bible rolled off the press, an underground revolution in bookmaking was quietly unfolding across medieval Europe and Asia. Picture a cramped scriptorium where monks spend years hand-copying texts, each word painstakingly inked onto fragile parchment. Now imagine the shock when someone carved an entire page of text onto a single wooden block, inked it, and pressed it onto paper, creating identical copies in minutes. This was block printing, a game-changing technique that began as early as the 8th century in East Asia and slowly migrated westward along bustling trade routes. The real marvel wasn't just speed, it was accessibility. Suddenly, religious images, playing cards, and even short texts could be reproduced cheaply and distributed widely. In China, where paper had been invented centuries earlier, Buddhist scrolls printed with carved wooden blocks circulated by the thousands. Korean artisans took it further, experimenting with movable metal type as early as the 13th century. Individual characters arranged like puzzle pieces to form different pages. These innovations didn't just save labor, they democratized knowledge, allowing ideas to spread beyond elite circles for the first time. European craftsmen, though slower to adopt these methods, began their own experiments. By the 14th century, block-printed devotional images and broadside single sheets of text appeared in German and Dutch markets. These crude precursors lacked the sophistication of later press, but they proved something revolutionary. Information could be standardized and mass-produced. When a woodcut of Christopher sold to pilgrims in 1423, nobody realized they were holding a prototype of the coming media explosion. What's often overlooked is how these early attempts shaped world-changing invention. Movable type required not just technical skill, but a cultural shift, a willingness to see books not as unique artworks, but as vessels for sharing ideas. The Middle Ages didn't just hand the Renaissance a printing press. They handed it a mindset, proving that knowledge, once liberated from the scribe's quill, could ignite revolutions. So the next time you tap on an e-book or share a meme, remember, your digital scrolls trace their lineage to those inky wooden blocks, where the first whispers of an information age began. Along the rushing rivers of medieval Europe, water mills did far more than grind wheat into flour. They became the beating heart of early industry. Picture a bustling mill complex where the same water wheel that turns a grindstone also operates massive wooden hammers, pounding freshly woven wool into dense, weatherproof cloth through a process called fulling. Nearby, another mill's power drives bellows that blast air into a furnace, raising temperatures high enough to smelt iron ore. Further downstream, a mill's relentless motion churns pulped rags into smooth sheets of paper, an innovation that would fuel the coming explosion of literacy and record-keeping. This wasn't just efficiency. It was the first whisper of mechanized mass production, centuries before the steam engine. The brilliance of these multitasking mills lay in their adaptability. Craftsmen redirected through intricate systems of gears, camshafts, and trip hammers, converting simple rotational energy into specialized motions. In the textile centers of Flanders, fulling mills reduced a days-long manual process to mere hours, with heavy mallets kneading cloth in troughs of water and cleansing agents like urine or clay, a medieval version of industrial chemistry. Ironworking mills transformed metallurgy, allowing furnaces to reach temperatures unattainable with hand-pumped bellows, producing stronger and more consistent metal for tools, weapons, and armor. Even the humble paper mill, introduced to Europe by Muslim craftsmen in Spain, revolutionized knowledge preservation by replacing costly parchment with affordable paper made from linen scraps. What's truly remarkable is how these innovations spread beyond elite workshops. By the 13th century, rural monasteries operated mills that processed local wool for export, while towns along the Rhine and Seine rivers boasted industrial mill complexes that functioned like proto-factories. The Cistercian monks, renowned for their technological savvy, built mills that operated on shifts, maximizing day and night, an early example of continuous production. Millwrights became medieval rock stars, their skills so coveted that towns offered tax exemptions to attract them. The Doomsday Book, England's great 11th century survey, recorded over 6,000 mills across the countryside, revealing just how deeply mechanization had already taken root. The legacy of these water-powered workshops echoes in unexpected ways. The cam and gear systems developed for medieval mills became blueprints for later machinery, from clock towers to Leonardo da Vinci's industrial designs. The organizational models, specialized labor, centralized production sites, and even maintenance schedules prefigured the factory systems of the 18th century. Most importantly, these mills proved that nature's forces could be harnessed not just for subsistence, but for transformation. So the next time you flip a light switch or hear the hum of modern machinery, remember, the age of industry didn't begin with coal and steam, but with the relentless turning of water wheels along medieval rivers, where the rhythm of progress first found its flow. Picture a medieval home before the chimney's invention, a single room where the entire family huddled around a central hearth, smoke curling upward to escape through a hole in the roof or a high window. Every meal, every winter night, meant breathing in soot and fumes, with walls blackened by decades of accumulated grime. Then came a simple yet transformative idea. What if the smoke could be guided outside through a dedicated passage? The chimney wasn't just a convenience. It reshaped daily life, architecture, and even human health in ways we still benefit from today. The earliest chimneys appeared in wealthier European homes by the 12th century, initially as crude flues built into thick stone walls. But their real breakthrough came with the development of the hooded fireplace, a design that funneled smoke upward more efficiently while radiating heat into the room. Suddenly, homes could be warmer without suffocating their occupants. For the first time, multi-story buildings became practical. Smoke no longer needed to rise through the entire house, so upper floors could be added without turning them into smoke-filled attics. This architectural leap paved the way for the towering townhouses of medieval cities, where merchants and craftsmen lived above their workshops. Beyond comfort, chimneys brought dramatic health improvements. Chronic respiratory ailments, once an unavoidable part of life, began to decline as families spent less time inhaling smoke. Eye irritations and lung conditions eased, especially among women and children who spent the most time indoors. Even cooking transformed. With better ventilation, kitchens could be separated from living spaces, reducing fire risks and allowing more elaborate meals to be prepared without overwhelming the household with fumes. The chimney's influence extended to social dynamics, too. Fireplaces with proper flues became gathering spots, their warmth and light creating natural centers for conversation and storytelling. The hearth, once a practical necessity, evolved into a symbol of home and hospitality. Meanwhile, builders experimented with new materials like brick and terracotta to construct more efficient flues, innovations that would later influence industrial furnace designs. Perhaps most unexpectedly, chimneys changed the way people thought about privacy and personal space. As homes grew vertically, separate bedrooms became feasible, marking the beginning of our modern notion of private living quarters. The Middle Ages didn't just give us a way to vent smoke, they gave us the blueprint for the comfortable, multi-room homes we take for granted today. So the next time you cozy up by a fireplace or admire a historic building's intricate brick chimneys, remember, their humble origins trace back to a time when clean air and warmth were revolutionary luxuries. In the cramped tunnels of medieval mines and on the rising scaffolds of cathedral construction sites, a simple wooden contraption changed the economics of manual labor forever: the wheelbarrow. What looks like a humble bucket on one wheel was actually a masterpiece of medieval engineering, allowing a single worker to move hundreds of pounds of stone, dirt, or ore with efficiency that would have stunned ancient builders. While the Chinese had developed early versions centuries before, European craftsmen refined the design into a leverage powerhouse, replacing the traditional two-handled litter that required two people with a balanced, single-wheeled carrier that human effort through physics. The secret lay in weight distribution. By placing the wheel at the front, medieval wheelbarrows shifted most of the load's weight onto the axle rather than the laborer's arms. This meant one person could transport up to 3 times as much material as before, with far less strain. Builders constructing soaring Gothic cathedrals relied on fleets of these wheelbarrows to ferry mortar and cut stone-up ramps, while miners used reinforced versions with iron-rimmed wheels to haul ore through muddy tunnels. Even farmers adopted them for moving manure or harvests, proving their versatility across industries. But the wheelbarrow's brilliance wasn't just practical, it was mathematical. Without realizing it, medieval carpenters had created a real-world lesson in mechanical advantage. The handles acted as levers, the wheel as a fulcrum, reducing the force needed to lift heavy loads. Modern engineers still study these principles when designing everything from construction equipment to robotic exoskeletons. Some of history's most ambitious projects, like the draining of the fens in England or the expansion of fortified city walls, would have been exponentially harder without this unassuming tool. What's often overlooked is how the wheelbarrow transformed labor dynamics. Suddenly, tasks that required teams could be handled by individuals, giving skilled workers more autonomy. Guild records show wages for haulers dropped as productivity soared, while construction timelines shrank dramatically. The wheelbarrow even played a subtle role in urban planning. Narrow medieval alleyways that couldn't accommodate carts could still be serviced by these compact carriers. Today's descendants of the medieval wheelbarrow are everywhere, from the aluminum models in suburban garages to the electric-powered versions on factory floors. But the core principle remains unchanged. A single wheel, a well-placed load, and human ingenuity turning sheer effort into graceful efficiency. The next time you see a wheelbarrow, don't just see a tool. See 1,000 years of physics and craftsmanship rolling forward on one perfect circle. Deep beneath the flickering torchlight of medieval foundries, a revolution in fire and metal was unfolding, one that would forge the backbone of the modern world. The blast furnace, towering like a brick sentinel over the landscape, wasn't just an upgrade to earlier smelting techniques. It was a thermodynamic marvel that reached temperatures hot enough to liquefy iron completely for the first time in history. While ancient blacksmiths had produced wrought iron through laborious bloomery methods, medieval metallurgists in places like Sweden's and Germany's cracked the code to continuous, high-volume production. By funneling a relentless blast of air through charcoal-fueled chambers, these furnaces didn't just melt ore. They transformed it into a molten river that could be cast into molds, creating objects of unprecedented strength and complexity. The secret lay in the furnace's vertical design and forced air supply. Bellows, often powered by water wheels, pumped oxygen-rich air through pipes into the combustion zone, supercharging the charcoal's burning potential. This created a sustained inferno exceeding 1,200 degrees Celsius, hot enough to chemically reduce iron ore into liquid metal that separated cleanly from slag. the result: cast iron that flowed like water into ready molds, producing everything from sturdy plowshares to intricate firebacks for grand fireplaces. For weapon makers, this meant crafting cannon barrels in single pours rather than painstakingly welding iron strips together. For farmers, it yielded durable tools that resisted shattering in rocky soil, dramatically boosting agricultural productivity. But the blast furnace's true legacy was its role as a stepping stone to steel. Medieval metalworkers noticed how cast iron's high carbon content made it brittle, but easily convertible into tougher materials through reheating and hammering, a process called fining. By the 15th century, Catalan forges were refining cast iron into usable steel at scale, while Austrian smelters experimented with adding limestone to remove impurities, foreshadowing modern steelmaking techniques. These innovations didn't just make better swords, they enabled the precision gears of clocks, the resilient axles of wagons, and eventually the skeletal frames of skyscrapers. What's often overlooked is how these furnaces reshaped society. Iron production moved from scattered rural bloomeries to centralized industrial sites near forests and rivers, creating early factory towns where specialists, ore miners, charcoal burners, mold makers, worked in coordinated teams. The demand for charcoal spurred sustainable forestry practices, while the wealth generated funded cathedrals and universities. Even warfare transformed. Cast iron cannonballs could now batter down castle walls that had stood impregnable for centuries. The blast furnace didn't just melt metal, it melted the old limits of human possibility, pouring the foundation for everything from steam engines to suspension bridges. So the next time you cross a wrought iron bridge or turn a steel doorknob, remember, their strength flows from those medieval furnaces where fire, ore, and ingenuity first fused into liquid progress. High atop the half-built walls of a medieval cathedral, a team of workers step endlessly inside a giant wooden wheel, their collective weight turning it like a human-powered hamster wheel. This was the crane, a deceptively simple machine that allowed just a few laborers to hoist multi-ton stone blocks with precision that would challenge modern equipment. While ancient civilizations used basic pulleys and ramps, medieval engineers refined these concepts into a masterpiece of mechanical efficiency, combining the power of compound pulleys with the relentless torque of human locomotion. The genius of these cranes lay in their elegant use of physics. Workers walking inside the large wooden wheels, some over 15 feet in diameter, rotated a central axle connected to a rope and pulley system. Thanks to gear ratios, each step translated into tremendous lifting power, allowing a small crew to raise stones heavier than elephants with controlled, inch-perfect movement. Surviving records from Canterbury Cathedral show, these cranes routinely lifted 2-ton blocks over 200 feet, higher than a 20-story building, with nothing but human strength and wooden mechanisms. Master builders even incorporated braking systems, letting workers lower materials as delicately as they raised them, preventing catastrophic slips during placement. What's astonishing is how these cranes became architectural partners rather than just tools. At the Tower of London, cranes installed precisely cut stones that still fit together seamlessly after 8 centuries. Strasbourg Cathedral's surviving crane mechanisms reveal notches for adjustable speeds, allowing delicate positioning of intricate carvings. Some cranes remained embedded in buildings after construction, becoming permanent lifting systems for maintenance, a medieval version of modern service elevators. The same principles powered harbor cranes that loaded ships with unprecedented efficiency, turning ports like Bruges and Venice into bustling trade hubs. The legacy of these human-powered giants echoes in surprising ways. Modern construction cranes still use their basic pulley configurations, while the concept of converting rotational motion into vertical lifting underpins everything from warehouse forklifts to ski lift mechanisms. Even the term crane itself comes from the bird-like appearance of medieval designs, with their long wooden jibs resembling outstretched necks. More profoundly, these machines embodied a shift in how societies approached large-scale projects, proving that with clever engineering, human labor could achieve superhuman results. So the next time you see a steel crane silhouetted against a city skyline, remember, its ancestor wasn't some industrial revolution invention, but a wooden wheel turned by the steady steps of medieval workers, lifting civilization literally stone by stone toward the heavens. In the hands of a medieval navigator or scholar, the astrolabe wasn't just a tool, it was a portable universe, its brass discs and finely etched lines capturing the celestial dance of stars and planets with breathtaking precision. Picture a disc about the size of a dinner plate, its surface a labyrinth of circles, curves, and Arabic numerals, rotating parts aligning to mirror the night sky's movements at any given moment. This elegant device, perfected by Islamic scholars and adopted across medieval Europe, could tell time by the sun or stars, calculate latitude for lost sailors, and even predict sunrise months in advance, all without electricity, batteries, or satellites. The astrolabe's genius lay in its layers of mathematical abstraction. Its front featured a movable reedy, a pierced metal web representing key stars, that rotated over a plate engraved with coordinates for a specific latitude. By aligning the reedy with the actual sky, users could solve problems visually that would otherwise require complex spherical trigonometry. A sailor off the coast of Portugal could hold the instrument vertically, sight the North Star through its alidade, a rotating pointer, and read his latitude directly from calibrated scales. Monks used astrolabes to determine prayer times by measuring the sun's altitude, while farmers consulted them to plan planting seasons based on stellar cycles. What's often forgotten is how this device bridged cultures and disciplines. Persian astronomer Al's 11th century treatise on astrolabes, translated into Latin, became required reading at European universities. Better known for his Canterbury Tales, even wrote an instruction manual for the device, proving its widespread use beyond scientific circles. The astrolabe's backside, typically inscribed with zodiac signs and calendar dates, doubled as a medieval calculator for problems ranging from land, surveying, to determining the height of a castle wall. The craftsmanship was as remarkable as the mathematics. Master metalworkers spent months engraving plates with painstaking accuracy, sometimes customizing them for specific latitudes. Some luxury astrolabes featured decorative calligraphy and intricate floral motifs, transforming scientific instruments into works of art. The sophistication of these devices quietly laid groundwork for later breakthroughs, used astrolabe-derived data to challenge Earth's place in the cosmos, while the instrument's stereographic projection method still underpins modern star charts. Perhaps the astrolabe's greatest legacy was its democratization of knowledge. Unlike bulky observatory instruments, it brought celestial navigation and timekeeping into the field, the classroom, and the merchant's caravan. When Portuguese explorers like to ventured down Africa's coast, their astrolabes were as vital as their ships' sails. This unassuming disk of metal didn't just map stars. It charted humanity's growing confidence to measure, navigate, and ultimately master the natural world. So the next time your phone's GPS pinpoints your location instantly, remember, the first step toward that convenience was taken centuries ago, when a scholar held up a brass disc to the sky and found his place in the cosmos. Bare hooves pounding across rocky medieval roads could only take a horse so far before injury sidelined these invaluable animals, until a simple curved piece of iron changed everything. The horseshoe, though its origins trace back to nomadic tribes, became a medieval game changer when European blacksmiths perfected the technique of hot fitting and nailing protective metal plates to hooves. This wasn't just about preventing wear. It unlocked unprecedented endurance for horses in agriculture, warfare, and long-distance trade, effectively rewriting the rules of mobility. Consider the sheer physics at play. A single horse's hoof striking hard ground bears the full force of its weight, nearly half a ton, with every step. Unshod hooves on rough terrain would split, bruise, or wear down within months, leaving animals lame and useless. But a properly fitted horseshoe absorbed shock, distributed pressure, and shielded the sensitive inner structures from stones and mud. Suddenly, a plow horse could work twice as long in rocky fields without injury, while war horses maintained their agility across battlefields littered with debris. The difference was so dramatic that medieval tax records often listed horseshoes among a farm's most valuable assets, sometimes worth more than the animal itself. The ripple effects transformed economies. Merchants, caravans could now traverse jagged mountain passes and cobbled city streets without constant stops to replace lame horses, shrinking travel times between trading hubs like Venice and Bruges by weeks. Farmers extended their plowing seasons as horses, no longer sidelined by hoof injuries, worked reliably through wet autumns and early frosts. Even the humble horseshoe nail became a minor industry, with specialized smiths producing thousands weekly to meet demand. The Crusades showcased their military value. Knights, whose mounts wore iron shoes, outpaced opponents struggling with barefoot horses down in rough terrain. What's often overlooked is the craftsmanship behind these early shoes. Medieval farriers didn't just hammer out generic iron crescents. They carefully shaped each shoe to an individual hoof's contours, heating the metal until it could be live-fitted, sealing it to the hoof's surface with a protective layer of smoking horn. This precise attention to biomechanics foreshadowed modern veterinary podiatry. Some designs even featured raised edges called, for better traction in mud, medieval equivalents of today's studded winter tires. The legacy of this innovation gallops far beyond the Middle Ages. Modern equestrian sports still rely on variations of medieval shoeing techniques, while the phrase, as important as a horseshoe nail, echoes its historical significance. More profoundly, it reminds us that sometimes the smallest inventions, just a few ounces of shaped iron, can carry civilization forward on strong, unbroken strides. In the dim glow of a medieval alchemist's workshop, a coiled copper tube dripped liquid fire into a waiting flask, a discovery that would intoxicate the world in more ways than one. What began as a quest to purify medicinal elixirs gave birth to the art of distillation, transforming fermented brews into something far more potent: spirits. While ancient civilizations had experimented with rudimentary stills, it was medieval Arab and European alchemists who perfected the coiled condenser and precise temperature control needed to produce high-proof alcohol consistently. Their breakthroughs didn't just create new drinks. They unlocked a tool that would revolutionize medicine, trade, and even science itself. The process was deceptively simple yet required meticulous precision. Heated in an alembic, a bulbous vessel with a long, cooling neck, wine or fermented grain mash released vapors rich in alcohol, which then condensed back into liquid as they traveled through the coiled tube. The result was aqua, water of life, a clear, fiery liquid that could reach over 60% alcohol content. Monasteries became early hubs of distillation, where monks produced spirits both as medicines and tonics, believing these potent extracts could preserve herbs, healing properties, or even prolong life. By the 14th century, recipes for distilled spirits appeared in medical texts across Europe, recommended for everything from disinfecting wounds to easing childbirth pains. But the impact went far beyond the apothecary's shelf. Distilled spirits became medieval Europe's first truly global commodity, unlike wine or beer, which spoiled during long voyages. Rum and brandy could cross oceans without losing potency. Sailors received daily rations of grog to prevent scurvy, while merchants traded barrels of whiskey and gin as currency as reliable as silver. The economic ripple effects were staggering. Sugar plantations in the Caribbean flourished to meet rum demand, while Scottish peat bogs became valuable fuel sources for whiskey production. Even social rituals transformed. Toasting with spirits became a symbol of trust, as the shared drink's clarity proved it hadn't been poisoned. What's often overlooked is how distillation reshaped science itself. The same glassware used to produce alcohol, retorts, condensers, and fractionating columns, became essential tools for isolating chemical compounds. Medieval alchemists noticed that different substances vaporized at distinct temperatures, laying groundwork for fractional distillation, a technique still used today to refine petroleum or produce pure oxygen. The quest to perfect spirits even led to early thermometers, as vintners sought precise heat control for consistent batches. When pioneered modern chemistry centuries later, he stood on the shoulders of those medieval alchemists who first learned to separate liquids by their boiling points. The legacy of this innovation swirls in every laboratory flask and cocktail glass. From the antiseptics that revolutionized surgery to the perfumes that became global luxuries, distillation's fingerprints are everywhere. So the next time you sip a fine whiskey or glance at a chemist's intricate glassware, remember, their origins trace back to those shadowy workshops where fire, copper, and curiosity first conspired to capture liquid lightning. While most medieval windmills stood like stationary giants waiting for favorable winds, a brilliant adaptation emerged in the rolling hills of northern Europe, the vertical windmill. Unlike their horizontal counterparts, which needed manual adjustment to face changing winds, these innovative structures featured sails mounted on a vertical axis, spinning gracefully no matter which way the breeze blew. Picture a massive wooden post with 4 or 8 triangular sails radiating outward like the spokes of an upside-down wheel, catching gusts from every direction with effortless efficiency. This wasn't just a tweak to existing designs. It was a fundamental reimagining of how to harness the wind's capricious power. The secret to their success lay in their elegant simplicity. Horizontal windmills required complex tailfan mechanisms or brute manpower to rotate their heavy wooden bodies toward the wind. But vertical mills, with their sails arranged symmetrically around a central shaft, eliminated this weakness entirely. Whether the wind came from the north, south, or shifted unpredictably, the sails always presented an optimal angle to the breeze, ensuring continuous operation even in fickle weather. Persian engineers had experimented with similar designs centuries earlier, but medieval European builders scaled them up dramatically, constructing mills that could grind grain, pump water, or saw timber with relentless consistency. Some stood over 30 feet tall, their sails turning with such force that they could power multiple grinding stones simultaneously, a medieval version of industrial multitasking. What's truly remarkable is how these mills anticipated modern renewable energy principles. The vertical axis design mirrors today's cutting-edge wind turbines, which excel in turbulent or variable wind conditions. Medieval builders even discovered that slightly twisting the sails, wooden frames increased efficiency, an early intuition of aerodynamic lift that wouldn't be formally explained until the 18th century. In regions like the windswept islands, vertical mills became community lifelines, their reliability making them far more practical than horizontal models that might sit idle for days waiting for the right wind direction. The legacy of these whirling giants extends beyond their mechanical ingenuity. They demonstrated that adapting to nature's variability could be smarter than trying to control it, a lesson that resonates in today's quest for sustainable energy. So the next time you see a modern vertical axis turbine spinning effortlessly in an urban park or atop a skyscraper, remember, its DNA traces back to those medieval craftsmen who first realized the wind didn't need to be chased, only welcomed from every possible angle. Among the clamor of medieval battlefields, where swords clashed and arrows flew, one weapon struck fear with its chilling mechanical efficiency: the crossbow. Unlike the longbow, which demanded years of training to master, this compact but deadly device relied on precise engineering rather than brute strength or skill. Its trigger mechanism, a marvel of medieval craftsmanship, didn't just revolutionize warfare. It introduced principles of leverage and material stress that would echo through centuries of mechanical design. At its core, the crossbow's genius lay in its ability to store energy. A metal or composite bow, drawn taut with a winding mechanism, held its lethal potential until released by a simple but ingenious trigger. This nut and sear system, a rotating piece of bone, horn, or metal that locked the bowstring in place, allowed even untrained soldiers to deliver armor-piercing shots with the pull of a finger. The physics were undeniable. By concentrating the force of a full draw into a compact frame, crossbows could launch bolts with enough velocity to penetrate at close range, leveling the battlefield between knights and commoners. But the crossbow's legacy extended far beyond its military impact. Its mechanisms fascinated medieval engineers, who recognized broader applications for its precise triggering action. The same sear and release concept appeared in early clock designs, where controlled energy release was essential for accurate timekeeping. Millwrights adapted crossbow trigger principles to create safety catches for heavy machinery, preventing catastrophic failures when gears jammed. Even the concept of loading energy into a system before controlled release found echoes in Renaissance siege engines and later industrial machines. Material science also advanced thanks to crossbow experimentation. The intense stress placed on bow limbs led to innovations in laminated wood and composite construction, layers of horn, sinew, and glue creating springs more resilient than solid wood. These techniques trickled into everyday tools, from carriage springs to early industrial looms. The crossbow's demand for consistency even spurred early quality control. Bolts were mass-produced to strict tolerances, foreshadowing the interchangeable parts revolution. What's often overlooked is how the crossbow embodied medieval Europe's shifting relationship with technology. Banned by the Church at the Second Lateran Council as too lethal for Christian warfare, it sparked debates about ethics in innovation that still resonate today. Yet its undeniable effectiveness ensured its survival, proving that technological progress couldn't be legislated away. The crossbow didn't just change how battles were fought, it challenged societies to reconcile ingenuity with morality, a dilemma as relevant now as it was 8 centuries ago. From the precision triggers of modern firearms to the fail-safe mechanisms in elevators and aircraft, the crossbow's influence remains locked and loaded in the machinery of our world. Its story reminds us that even tools of war can, in time, become blueprints for peace. On the checkered surface of a simple chessboard, medieval scholars saw far more than a game. They glimpsed the future of mathematics. While nobles played for sport, thinkers and transformed those 64 squares into a laboratory for probing the deepest questions of strategy, probability, and logical reasoning. The chessboard became their canvas for exploring permutations, calculating how many ways pieces could be arranged, or how a knight's path might cover every square without repetition. These weren't just intellectual exercises. They were the first stirrings of computational thinking, centuries before the invention of computers. Consider the Knight's Tour problem, a puzzle that fascinated medieval mathematicians. By attempting to move a knight across every square of the board without retracing steps, they unknowingly grappled with concepts now fundamental to computer science: Hamiltonian paths and graph theory. Manuscripts from 14th century Spain show scholars methodically working through possible sequences, their handwritten diagrams resembling early algorithms. What began as royal entertainment became a training ground for systematic problem-solving, where every move represented a branching decision tree of possibilities, an embryonic form of modern game theory. Even more revolutionary was how chess mirrored medieval society's shifting worldview. The game's strict rules and quantifiable outcomes reflected a growing belief that complex systems, whether military campaigns or economic trades, could be analyzed through logic rather than divine will. When used chess pieces to model philosophical arguments in his 13th century, Magna, he was essentially creating for thought processes, arranging concepts like pawns to test their relationships. This symbolic approach anticipated everything from algebra to artificial intelligence, proving that a child's game could become the key to unlocking abstract reasoning. The chessboard's grid also provided medieval minds with their first intuitive grasp of coordinate geometry. Accounts from Moorish Spain describe scholars assigning numerical values to squares, foreshadowing Cartesian coordinates by 400 years. Merchants adapted these grids for accounting ledgers, while architects used them to calculate structural loads, each application reinforcing the idea that space and quantity could be systematically mapped and manipulated. What's often overlooked is how these playful investigations shaped real-world decisions. Chess problems influenced military tactics during the 100 Years' War, where commanders visualized battlefields as giant boards. The game's emphasis on resource allocation, when to sacrifice a piece for positional advantage, found echoes in medieval trade negotiations and political alliances. Even today's machine learning algorithms trace part of their lineage to those medieval scholars who first saw in chess not just a pastime, but a mirror of life's infinite variables. So the next time you play chess or tackle a logic puzzle, remember, you're participating in an intellectual tradition that turned 64 squares into a proving ground for human ingenuity, where every move whispers of possibilities first imagined centuries ago under candlelight and parchment. The roar of early cannons didn't just shatter castle walls, it shattered centuries of military tradition, forcing medieval minds to confront the raw physics of fire and metal in ways they'd never imagined. Those first crude bombards, little more than iron barrels strapped to wooden frames, were as dangerous to their operators as to their targets, with unpredictable explosions scattering shrapnel in all directions. Yet within these chaotic experiments lay the seeds of two scientific revolutions: the study of projectile motion and the quest for stronger alloys. Every misfire was a lesson in pressure dynamics, every cracked barrel a puzzle in metallurgy, pushing craftsmen and scholars alike to decode nature's most violent reactions. What made these early firearms revolutionary wasn't just their destructive power, but the precision they demanded. Gunners quickly realized that consistent performance required exact measurements of powder grains, barrel length, even the angle of elevation. By the 15th century, handwritten artillery manuals read like early physics textbooks, detailing how a bombard's 45-degree angle yielded maximum range, while higher arcs created plunging fire. These were the first systematic studies of parabolic trajectories, predating Galileo's famous incline experiments by 200 years. Nuremberg gunsmiths even developed graduated sights and calibrated powder scoops, turning what had been guesswork into repeatable science. The metallurgical challenges were equally transformative. Early cannons often burst because cast iron's brittle crystals couldn't withstand repeated explosions. This forced foundries to experiment with bronze, a more flexible but costly alternative, and eventually to pioneer refined iron casting techniques. The best armorers learned to rotate molds during pouring, creating denser, more uniform barrels free of weak spots. Some even annealed their creations by burying them in smoldering dung for weeks, a medieval form of stress relief that reduced internal fractures. These incremental advances didn't just produce better weapons. They laid the groundwork for steam engine boilers and industrial pressure vessels that would power the factories of tomorrow. Beyond battlefields, firearm physics sparked broader intellectual curiosity. Scholars pondered why cannonballs didn't fly forever in straight lines, theorizing about an invisible resistance, what we now call air friction. Artists sketched elaborate diagrams of imaginary multi-barreled volley guns, while alchemists searched for the perfect powder mix, inadvertently pioneering early chemistry. Even the recoil phenomenon fascinated thinkers, suggesting invisible forces acted in equal and opposite ways. A concept Newton would later formalize as his third law of motion. Perhaps the most unexpected legacy was how firearms democratized power. A peasant with minimal training could now fell an armored knight, eroding feudal hierarchies and shifting influence to centralized states that could afford artillery corps. The very unpredictability of early guns, their smoke, noise, and lethal randomness, made them psychological weapons as much as physical ones, rewriting the rules of engagement forever. So the next time you see a modern rocket's controlled explosion, or a suspension bridges precisely calculated load limits, remember, their origins trace back to those smoky medieval workshops where fire, metal, and human curiosity first collided with earth-shaking force. In the quiet cloisters of medieval monasteries, where monks meticulously divided their days into prayers and labor, an accidental discovery swung into view, literally. Watching a hanging censer sway back and forth in the chapel, some sharp-eyed observer noticed something remarkable. No matter how wide or narrow the arc of its motion, each swing took precisely the same amount of time. This deceptively simple observation, scribbled in the margins of manuscripts or passed down orally among craftsmen, held the key to one of history's most profound breakthroughs: the pendulum's role in mastering time itself. What made this phenomenon so revolutionary wasn't just its regularity, but its defiance of intuition. Unlike water clocks that slowed as reservoirs emptied or sundials rendered useless by clouds, a swinging weight seemed to obey mathematical consistency, an earthly echo of celestial order. Though medieval thinkers lacked the vocabulary of periodic motion or harmonic oscillation, they grasped the practical implications. By the 14th century, some clockmakers experimented with crude, vergand mechanisms, using oscillating rods to regulate gear trains. These early attempts, though far less precise than Galileo's later pendulum clocks, revealed a growing understanding that controlling time required harnessing natural rhythms rather than fighting them. The real genius of these medieval observations lay in their interdisciplinary ripple effects. Astronomers noted how pendulum-like motions appeared in celestial cycles, while architects borrowed the concept for metronomes that kept laborers in sync during cathedral construction. Even musical notation benefited. The steady back and forth of a pendulum's swing mirrored the measured beats needed for complex polyphony. This cross-pollination of ideas showed how a single natural phenomenon, once scrutinized, could unlock advancements across seemingly unrelated fields. Long before Newton formulated his laws of motion or built the first pendulum clock, medieval minds were laying the conceptual groundwork. Their notebooks reveal sketches of weighted strings alongside calculations for gear ratios, proving they saw the connection between swinging objects and mechanical regulation. Some even speculated about using pendulums to measure earthly tremors, an early intuition of seismology. The pendulum's journey from chapel curiosity to scientific instrument reminds us that breakthroughs often begin not with eureka moments, but with patient observation of the ordinary. So the next time you check the seconds ticking by on a clock or watch a child's playground swing, remember, the rhythm of modern life owes its precision to those medieval observers who first saw in a swaying sensor the heartbeat of time itself. Beneath the rhythmic thumping of wooden hammers in a medieval Spanish valley, a quiet revolution was pulping its way into history: the European paper mill. While scholars in China had been crafting paper from mulberry bark and rags since the 2nd century, and Islamic artisans perfected its smooth texture in Baghdad's bustling workshops, it took until the 12th century for this transformative technology to cross into Christian Europe. The moment it did, the very texture of knowledge changed, literally. No longer confined to costly parchment made from scraped animal skins, words could now flow onto affordable, mass-produced sheets, turning literacy from a luxury for elites into a possibility for merchants, students, and even ambitious peasants. The genius of medieval papermaking lay in its alchemy of recycling and refinement. Workers soaked discarded linen rags, often scavenged from tailors' scraps or old ship sails, in vats of water until the fibers broke down into a pulpy slurry. This murky soup was then poured onto fine mesh screens, shaken to interlock the fibers, and pressed into thin sheets that dried into durable writing surfaces. Compared to parchment, which required the skins of dozens of sheep for a single Bible, paper's rag-based origins made it startlingly economical. The first water-powered paper mills, like those in Italy, turned this craft into an industry, with trip hammers mechanizing the pounding process and iron molds allowing faster sheet formation. Suddenly, a single mill could produce thousands of sheets weekly, enough to supply growing universities, notaries, and merchants ledgers across the continent. But paper's impact went far beyond cost. Its smooth, consistent surface welcomed the delicate strokes of new writing technologies, quills sharpened to fine points, and later, metal nibs that could scratch across parchment but glided effortlessly on paper. Scribes found they could write smaller and faster, conserving precious materials. The rise of Gothic script, with its efficient, angular letters, owes as much to paper's forgiving texture as to aesthetic trends. Even the concept of drafts and revisions became feasible. Where parchment demanded perfection, scraping errors risked tearing the skin. Paper allowed messy first attempts and corrections, a boon for thinkers like Thomas, whose sprawling theological commentaries might never have existed without plentiful scrap paper. The ripple effects transformed society. Town clerks could now keep meticulous records of births, deaths, and property transfers. Merchant guilds maintained detailed account books, tracking transactions across Europe's expanding trade networks. At the University of Paris, students no longer had to share a single precious parchment textbook. Paper copies circulated widely, fueling explosive debates in theology and natural philosophy. Perhaps most subversively, paper became the medium for vernacular literature. Romances, satires, and manuals written not in elite Latin, but in everyday languages like Italian or French. Dante's Divine Comedy, with its vivid Italian verses, might have remained a local curiosity without paper's ability to spread it far beyond Florence. What's often overlooked is how paper mills became early hubs of industrial espionage. Guarded like modern tech startups, their techniques were closely held secrets. Watermarks, those faint designs visible when held to light, began as makers' marks to distinguish authentic paper from knockoffs, evolving into both quality guarantees and covert propaganda. Some bore symbols of local rulers or religious orders. The craft's spread followed trade routes and political alliances. Jewish papermakers expelled from Spain brought their skills to Ottoman lands, while German mills flourished under imperial patronage. By the Times press appeared in the 15th century, Europe had already been preconditioned for a media revolution, not by the printing press alone, but by the mountains of affordable paper waiting to receive its metal type. The Middle Ages didn't just give us a writing surface. They gave us the first information economy, where ideas could travel lighter, faster, and farther than ever before. So the next time you jot a note or flip through a paperback, remember, its fibers connect you to those medieval rag collectors and millworkers who turned laundry into literacy and scraps into civilization's new canvas. In the shadow of soaring cathedrals, where monks once mixed herbal remedies in quiet cloisters, a radical idea took shape, that healing the sick should be an organized, compassionate endeavor, not just scattered acts of charity. The medieval hospital, born from monastic infirmaries and pilgrims' shelters, became something unprecedented. A dedicated space where medicine met meticulous record-keeping, where the rhythms of prayer and prognosis intertwined to forge the earliest blueprints of modern healthcare. Far from the crude stereotypes of medieval medicine, these institutions combined spiritual care with startlingly practical innovations, from specialized wards to early forms of patient triage. Take the hotel in Paris, founded in the 7th century and still operating today. Its vast halls, illuminated by candles and compassion, welcomed everyone from wounded soldiers to impoverished mothers. Here, Augustinian sisters not only changed bandages, but kept detailed logs of treatments and outcomes, a medieval precursor to medical charts. Salerno's renowned medical school, blending Greek, Arab, and Jewish traditions, trained physicians who then staffed hospitals across Europe, creating the first threads of a professionalized medical network. Even the layout of these spaces reflected evolving understanding. Separate sections for contagious patients, herbal gardens for fresh remedies, and sunlit galleries where clean air was considered vital to recovery. What set these institutions apart wasn't just their scale, but their systematization. At London's hospital, established in the 12th century, admissions were recorded with symptoms and treatments, allowing caregivers to track what worked. Pharmacies stocked standardized remedies based on Arabic formularies, while surgical tools were cleaned with vinegar and hot water, early nods to antiseptic principles. The famous regimen guidelines, circulated among hospital staff, blended dietary advice, exercise recommendations, and mental health awareness in a holistic approach that feels surprisingly contemporary. The legacy of these medieval hospitals pulses through modern healthcare in unexpected ways. Their emphasis on compassionate record-keeping foreshadowed evidence-based medicine, while their focus on clean, orderly environments laid groundwork for germ theory centuries later. Perhaps most profoundly, they established the radical notion that healthcare was a communal responsibility, a value etched into the walls of every clinic and research hospital today. So the next time you see an ambulance speed toward a modern medical center, remember, its flashing lights trace back to those candle-lit halls where science and service first joined hands. At first glance, the humble button seems like a minor player in medieval innovation, until you realize how profoundly it reshaped human movement, labor, and even social dynamics. Before buttons, clothing relied on pins, laces, or simply loose draping, restricting motion and requiring constant adjustment. But when medieval tailors began sewing small discs of bone, wood, or metal onto reinforced fabric, they weren't just accessorizing. They were engineering garments that could withstand the rigors of field work, combat, and craft work without coming undone. The breakthrough wasn't just the button itself, but the marriage of material science and practical design. Early buttons, found in 13th century German burials, reveal meticulous craftsmanship. Some lathe-turned from antler with perfectly centered holes, others cast in bronze with intricate engravings. These weren't mere trinkets. They distributed stress across reinforced buttonholes, allowing sleeves to cling tightly to wrists without impeding a blacksmith's hammer swing or a scribe's quill strokes. Tailors soon discovered that spacing buttons closely along a doublet's front could create a seal, a game changer for sailors and shepherds facing harsh weather. Even armor adapted, with articulated plates secured by buttons allowing knights unprecedented flexibility in battle. What's often overlooked is how buttons democratized functionality. A farmer's wool tunic, fastened with simple horn buttons, could endure years of hard labor without tearing at the seams, while a merchant's buttoned cloak signaled both practicality and status through carved designs. The rise of button-making guilds in 14th century France and Flanders turned this accessory into an industry, with specialized workshops producing everything from pewter buttons for the middle class to gilded ones for royalty. Buttons even influenced hygiene. Tight closures kept out lice and dirt, while removable buttons allowed garments to be washed separately. A small but significant leap in public health. The ripple effects stretched far beyond fashion. Buttons demanded precision in both their manufacture and their application, spurring advancements in metalworking, wood turning, and needlecraft. The delicate buttonhole stitch, designed to prevent fraying around frequent friction points, became a benchmark of tailoring skill. Ship manifests show buttons spreading globally along trade routes, with Venetian glass buttons reaching as far as Mongol courts, while Chinese silk robes adopted European-style fastenings. Most profoundly, buttons redefined the human relationship with clothing. For the first time, garments could be both secure and swiftly removable, a duality that transformed everything from emergency response to child-rearing. When we zip up a jacket or snap a shirt today, we're enacting a medieval innovation that turned clothing from a passive covering into an active tool, one that moves with us rather than against us. The button didn't just fasten fabric. It fastened the modern world's sleeves, collars, and cuffs to a legacy of ingenious simplicity. From the flickering candlelight of medieval workshops to the soaring arches of Gothic cathedrals, we've traced 28 astonishing innovations that prove the so-called Dark Ages were anything but dark. Far from a stagnant pause between antiquity and the Renaissance, this thousand-year span was a relentless hotbed of problem-solving, where monks became opticians, farmers turned into engineers, and alchemists accidentally laid the foundations of modern chemistry. Every time you glance at your wristwatch, you're witnessing the legacy of mechanical clocks perfected in monastery towers. Each sip of morning coffee owes its existence to medieval distillation techniques. Even the university lecture hall, where groundbreaking ideas are debated today, traces its lineage back to those first bustling classrooms in Bologna and Paris. What's most remarkable is how these inventions reveal medieval minds thinking centuries ahead of their time. The windmills spinning across Europe weren't just flower factories. They were early experiments in renewable energy. The Astrolabe's intricate brass discs didn't just guide sailors. They modeled the cosmos with mathematical precision that still inspires astronomers. And those seemingly simple horseshoes, they transformed economies by extending the working life of horses, turning them into the engines of agriculture, trade, and exploration. This was an era that saw no boundary between art and science, where stained glass artisans discovered principles of light refraction while crafting biblical scenes, and cathedral architects calculated structural loads while reaching for the divine. The real lesson here isn't just about historical trivia. It's about recognizing innovation where we least expect it. Medieval breakthroughs didn't happen in well-funded labs or prestigious institutions, but in muddy fields, smoky forges, and cramped scriptoria. They remind us that progress often wears humble disguises. A curved piece of glass becomes eyeglasses. A wooden wheel becomes a crane. A scrap of linen becomes paper. Most importantly, these inventions show how interconnected human advancement truly is, how Chinese papermaking met Arabic medicine, how Persian windmill designs inspired Dutch land reclamation, how the quest for better beer led to temperature measurement. So the next time someone dismisses the Middle Ages as backward or superstitious, you'll know the truth. They were the original startup era, full of tinkerers, dreamers, and relentless problem solvers. If this journey through medieval ingenuity sparked your curiosity, tap that like button. It's a modern invention, but the impulse to share knowledge is timeless. Subscribe for more deep dives into history's hidden turning points, and drop a comment below. Which medieval innovation shocked you the most? Was it the mechanical clock keeping time centuries before digital watches, or the heavy plow that literally reshaped the landscape of Europe? However you answer, you're now part of a conversation that stretches back to those first scholars huddled over parchment, proving that great ideas never really go out of style.